The massive Brahman bull's desperate bellow echoed across Cooper's Basin as dawn broke over the Florida swampland. Atlas, once proud and majestic, now struggled in toxic mud up to his chest, each movement pushing him deeper into the deadly quicksand. Around him, hundreds of medicinal leeches formed an undulating protective ring, a sight that stopped the arriving rangers in their tracks. "In 30 years, I've never seen anything like this," Thomas Wilson whispered, lowering his binoculars. "Those leeches should be attacking him, not protecting him." Bobby Miller dropped to his knees at the swamp's edge, his weathered face contorted with anguish. "That's my boy out there," he choked. "My Atlas." Behind them, Samantha Hayes stared at her water testing kit, her face pale. "This water's not just toxic," she said. "It's deliberately poisoned. And whatever's happening here, it's bigger than any of us realized." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Millbrook Ranch had been in the Miller family for 4 generations, nestled in the rolling pastures 15 miles north of Cooper's Basin. Once thriving with over 200 head of cattle, the ranch had dwindled to barely 40 animals after 3 consecutive years of punishing drought. The sprawling white farmhouse with its wraparound porch and peeling paint stood as a testament to better days when Bobby Miller's grandfather had made Millbrook one of the most respected cattle operations in the county. Bobby Miller stood on that same porch now, watching the sunset with tired eyes. At 58, his once robust frame had grown leaner, his red-blonde hair faded to a weathered gray. The wrinkles around his eyes had deepened not just from squinting at the Florida sun, but from the constant worry of impending foreclosure. The bank had given him 3 months. 3 months to make a miracle happen, or lose everything his family had built. His salvation, he believed, grazed contentedly in the north pasture. Atlas, a purebred Brahman bull with a sleek silver-gray coat and a pronounced shoulder hump, was the finest specimen Bobby had ever raised. Standing 6 feet tall at the shoulder and weighing over 2,200 pounds of solid muscle, Atlas was more than just an impressive animal. He was Bobby's last hope. "He's looking good today," came a voice from behind him. Jessica Miller walked onto the porch, a veterinary bag slung over her shoulder. At 32, she had her father's determined jaw and her late mother's intelligent eyes. 3 months ago, she'd left her successful veterinary practice in Atlanta to help save the family ranch, a place she'd once sworn never to return to. "Blood work came back clear," she continued, setting her bag down. "The Oak Ridge breeding program will pay top dollar for him." Bobby nodded, unable to express how her return had meant more to him than any breeding fee. "Mike's getting the trailer ready for tomorrow's transport," he said instead. Behind them, Mike Reynolds emerged from the barn. At 45, he'd worked at Millbrook since he was 17, more family than employee. "Got those new reinforced gates installed," he called. "That boy's strong as a freight train when he gets spooked." Bobby smiled faintly, remembering the day they'd found Atlas, a scrawny, abandoned calf after a hurricane had scattered a neighboring herd. The vet had given him a 10% chance of survival. Bobby had bottle-fed him every 2 hours for weeks, sleeping in the barn on a cot. The bond they'd formed transcended the usual relationship between rancher and livestock. Atlas seemed to understand human speech, coming when called by name, even responding differently to each person on the ranch. "This deal will save us," Bobby said quietly. 6 months of breeding fees plus first pick of the calves. "The bank will have to extend our loan." Jessica placed a hand on her father's shoulder, neither of them voicing their shared fear. That Atlas, with his unusual intelligence, somehow knew exactly how much was riding on his broad shoulders. The morning dawned clear and bright, the kind of perfect Florida day that made the hardships of ranching seem worthwhile. Bobby checked his watch for the 3rd time in 5 minutes as Mike backed the livestock trailer up to the loading chute. They'd planned to reach Oak Ridge Ranch by noon, allowing plenty of time for Atlas to settle in before the veterinary examinations scheduled for later that afternoon. "Easy now, big fella," Bobby murmured as he approached Atlas in the holding pen. The massive bull stood calmly, his intelligent eyes following Bobby's movements. Unlike most Brahman bulls, known for their temperamental nature, Atlas had always been remarkably even-tempered. His only show of aggression had come when smaller animals were threatened, a protective instinct that seemed almost human in its discernment. "Today's the big day," Bobby continued, running a hand along Atlas's muscular shoulder. "You're gonna help save this place." Atlas lowered his massive head, gently bumping against Bobby's chest in what had become their familiar greeting. Jessica watched from the fence, a smile playing at her lips despite her concerns. "He acts more like a dog than a bull sometimes," she said. "Are you sure 6 months away won't be hard on him?" Bobby shrugged, not wanting to acknowledge the tightness in his throat. "He'll be treated like royalty over there, and we need this, Jess. The breeding fee alone will cover the mortgage payments through winter." Mike joined them, carrying halters for Atlas and the 3 purebred calves that would also make the journey. "Transport documents are all set," he reported, "and I packed extra feed just in case their grass isn't up to Atlas's standards." Bobby nodded appreciatively. Mike understood what Atlas meant to him, not just financially but personally. The bull had been a constant through Bobby's darkest days after his wife Linda passed 5 years ago. Loading went smoothly. Atlas walked up the ramp without hesitation, followed by the 3 calves, 2 heifers, and a small bull calf that Atlas had taken a particular shine to. The little one had been born weak, rejected by its mother, and Atlas had inexplicably appointed himself its protector, standing guard while Bobby bottle-fed it. "All secure?" Mike called after checking the latches twice. "We're good to go." Bobby climbed into the driver's seat with Jessica beside him and Mike in the back seat of the crew cab. The truck pulled away from Millbrook, the weight of the trailer a reassuring presence behind them. They followed the main highway for 30 miles before turning onto the county road that would take them past Cooper's Basin, a shortcut to Oak Ridge that would save them nearly an hour. The trouble began on the narrow stretch of road that skirted the northern edge of the swamp. Bobby noticed the black pickup truck in his rearview mirror just moments before it accelerated, pulling alongside their vehicle. "What the hell?" he muttered, slowing slightly. The pickup swerved suddenly, forcing Bobby's truck toward the shoulder. Behind them they heard Atlas's concerned bellow. "Hold on!" Bobby shouted, struggling to maintain control as the truck and trailer fish-tailed on the gravel shoulder. The black pickup cut in front of them, forcing Bobby to slam on the brakes. The trailer jackknifed slightly, the truck coming to a shuddering halt. Before any of them could react, 3 masked men leapt from the pickup, one wielding a shotgun. "Out of the truck! Now!" the armed man shouted. "Do what they say," Bobby said quietly to Jessica and Mike. "Don't try anything." They exited slowly, hands raised. 2 of the masked men kept them covered while the 3rd moved toward the trailer. "This is just a robbery," the apparent leader said. "Stay quiet and nobody gets hurt." Bobby watched helplessly as the 3rd man opened the trailer's side access door and slipped inside. Through the trailer's slats, Bobby could see the man moving among the animals, sizing them up. "The calves," Jessica whispered. "They're taking the calves." She was right. Moments later, the man emerged, dragging the smallest calf by a rope around its neck. The little bull calf struggled and bawled in terror, a sound that cut through Bobby like a knife. What happened next occurred so quickly that Bobby would later struggle to describe it. A deafening crash came from inside the trailer, followed by the terrified shouts of the masked man still inside. The entire trailer rocked violently as Atlas, responding to the calf's distress, slammed his massive body against the interior partition. With a sound of tearing metal, the weakened gate gave way, Atlas charged through the opening, his 2,200 pounds of muscle and fury focused entirely on the man dragging the calf. The masked figures scattered, one firing a wild shotgun blast that went wide. "Atlas, no!" Bobby shouted, but it was too late. The massive bull thundered past them, hooves pounding the earth as he charged after the man with the calf. The rustler dropped the rope and sprinted toward the swamp's edge, Atlas in close pursuit. The bull's surprising speed closed the distance quickly, but the man reached the tree line and plunged into the thick vegetation of Cooper's Basin. Atlas hesitated only a moment at the swamp's edge before following, disappearing into the tangled undergrowth with a crashing of branches and splashing of water. Bobby was already running, Mike and Jessica close behind. The remaining rustlers scrambled into their pickup and sped away, clearly deciding that whatever they'd planned wasn't worth facing a rampaging Brahman bull. "Atlas!" Bobby called, reaching the spot where the bull had entered the swamp. "Atlas, come back!" Only silence answered him, broken by the distant calls of birds disturbed by the commotion. The small calf stood trembling where the rustler had dropped it, and Jessica quickly gathered it up. "He went in after that man," Mike said, peering into the dense swamp vegetation. "I've never seen him move like that." "We need to go after him," Bobby said, already taking a step toward the murky water. Jessica caught his arm. "Dad, no. Cooper's Basin is over 5,000 acres of swampland. It's getting dark soon, and you know how dangerous it is in there, even in daylight." "I can't leave him," Bobby insisted, his voice breaking. "He's in there because he was protecting our animals." "We need help," Jessica said firmly. "Professional help. If we go charging in there, we'll just get lost ourselves." Mike was already on his phone. "I'm calling the Wildlife Management Service. They have rangers who know the swamp." Bobby stared into the darkening swamp, his heart pounding with fear for the animal that had become so much more than livestock to him. Somewhere in that vast wetland, Atlas was alone, confused, possibly injured from the shotgun blast. Each minute that passed reduced the chances of finding him before the swamp's many dangers claimed him. "Hang on, boy," he whispered. "We're coming for you." As darkness fell over Cooper's Basin, Bobby paced the swamp's edge like a caged animal, checking his watch every few minutes. Mike had managed to reach the Wildlife Management Services, but they'd been told a team couldn't arrive until morning. For Bobby, the thought of Atlas spending a night alone in the treacherous swamp was unbearable. "They said it's too dangerous at night," Jessica explained again, her voice gentle but firm. "Even with proper equipment, the rangers won't risk it." "Atlas could be drowning right now," Bobby replied, his voice cracking. "He doesn't know that swamp. There's quicksand, gators, water moccasins, and we wouldn't be able to see any of those things in the dark," Mike interjected, placing a steady hand on Bobby's shoulder. "First light, we'll be ready to go in with the rangers." Bobby nodded reluctantly, knowing they were right but hating the helplessness that washed over him. They'd secured the remaining calves back in the trailer and parked it safely off the road. With no cell service this close to the basin, they'd decided to set up a makeshift camp at the swamp's edge, keeping vigil through the night. As Jessica built a small fire, Bobby found himself staring into the darkness, straining to hear any sound that might be Atlas. Instead, all he heard were the normal nighttime sounds of the swamp, frogs, insects, and the occasional splash of something entering the water. "He's smart," Jessica said, joining her father. "Smarter than any bull I've ever treated. If any animal can survive a night in there, it's Atlas." Bobby tried to take comfort in her words, but the knot in his stomach only tightened. "I raised him from a calf," he said quietly. "When your mother got sick and I was spending all those nights at the hospital, I'd come home at dawn and find Atlas waiting by the gate. Like he knew something was wrong. Like he was worried for me." Jessica slipped her arm through her father's. It was rare for him to speak of her mother's illness, the long, painful decline that had drained not only their emotions but also their finances. The medical bills had been the beginning of Millbrook's financial troubles. "I remember," she said softly. "Mom used to say Atlas had an old soul." The night passed with agonizing slowness. Bobby dozed fitfully, jerking awake at every unusual sound from the swamp. By the time the eastern sky began to lighten, his eyes were red-rimmed and burning with exhaustion and worry. The Rangers arrived just after sunrise, a team of 4 in 2 mud-spattered jeeps loaded with rescue equipment. Their leader, Thomas Wilson, was a tall, weathered man in his early 40s who carried himself with the quiet authority of someone who knew exactly how dangerous their task was. "Mr. Miller?" he asked, approaching Bobby with an outstretched hand. "Thomas Wilson, Wildlife Management Services. I understand your bull is somewhere in the basin?" Bobby shook his hand, quickly explaining the events of the previous day. Thomas listened without interruption, his expression neutral, but Bobby couldn't miss the skeptical glance he exchanged with the younger woman beside him when he described Atlas's protective behavior. "This is Sam Hayes, our wetland biologist," Thomas introduced. "And that's Kyle Peterson and Marcus Wright, our tracking specialists." Sam stepped forward, her expression more sympathetic than her colleagues. In her mid-30s, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, she had the focused look of someone who took her job seriously. "How long has your bull been missing now?" she asked. "About 16 hours, Bobby answered, his voice tense. "We need to start searching immediately." Thomas pulled out a topographical map of Cooper's Basin, spreading it on the hood of his Jeep. "The basin is complex terrain. Some parts are only a few inches deep, others have sinkholes that drop 20 feet. We need to be methodical." "We don't have time for methodical," Bobby objected. "Atlas could be dying out there." Thomas regarded him steadily. "Mr. Miller, I understand your concern, but we have limited resources. Organizing a full-scale search for livestock isn't typically—" "He's not just livestock," Jessica cut in sharply. "Atlas is worth over $50,000 as a breeding bull, and he's the last chance our ranch has." Bobby shot his daughter a grateful look, though money was the last reason he wanted Atlas back. He couldn't explain to these strangers what the bull meant to him personally. "Plus," Mike added, "the men who tried to steal our calves might still be in there. That makes it a criminal matter." This seemed to get Thomas's attention. "You said they were masked. Any identifying features?" While Mike described the rustlers to Marcus, who took notes, Sam approached Bobby with a more practical question. "What exactly are we looking for? Weight, coloring, any distinctive markings?" "Brahman bull, silver-gray coat, probably around 2,200 pounds, Bobby replied. "He has a notch in his right ear from an old injury, and his left horn has a slight curve that the right doesn't." Sam nodded, making notes. "That size will leave clear tracks, at least. The good news is, large animals typically don't go far in unfamiliar terrain, especially in a swamp. Unless they're chasing something," Jessica pointed out. Atlas was in pursuit of that rustler. Thomas rejoined them, having made his decision. "All right, we'll split into 2 teams. Kyle and Marcus will start from where the bull entered and track forward. Sam and I will take the eastern approach and work our way in. Mr. Miller, you and your people should stay here in case he finds his way back." "No way," Bobby said firmly. "I'm going with you. Atlas knows me. He'll come to my voice." A tense silence followed as Thomas seemed to weigh the additional liability against the potential benefit. Finally, he nodded reluctantly. "Fine. You can come with Sam and me, but you follow our lead, understand? This swamp kills people who don't respect it." Bobby agreed immediately. Jessica insisted on joining the other team, citing her veterinary expertise if Atlas was found injured. After a quick briefing on safety protocols and emergency signals, they gathered their equipment and prepared to enter the swamp. As they were about to set out, Sam stopped suddenly, Kneeling by the water's edge where Atlas had entered the swamp, she dipped a sample vial into the murky water, her brow furrowing as she examined it. "Everything okay?" Thomas asked. "Not sure," Sam replied, tucking the vial into her pack. "The water seems off. Unusual algae growth patterns. I've been monitoring some concerning changes in the basin's ecosystem. We can worry about water samples later," Bobby said impatiently. "Atlas is what matters now." Sam nodded, but her concerned expression remained as they set off into the swamp, the morning sun already burning away the mist that hung over the water. The search was grueling from the start. Though parts of Cooper's Basin were navigable by airboat, the area where Atlas had disappeared was a dense mixture of cypress trees, sawgrass, and treacherous mud flats. They moved carefully, following a trail of broken vegetation and massive hoof prints that told the story of Atlas's headlong charge into the unknown. He was moving fast, Thomas observed, kneeling to examine a particularly deep imprint. No hesitation. "He was protecting the calf," Bobby said. "He's always been that way with the smaller animals." Thomas didn't respond, but Bobby caught the skeptical look he exchanged with Sam. He was used to it. People who worked with wildlife rarely attributed human-like motivations to animals. But they didn't know Atlas. They had been searching for nearly 2 hours when their radios crackled to life. It was Kyle from the other team. "Thomas, we've found something strange, about half a mile in from the northeast quadrant." "The bull?" Thomas asked immediately. "No, but we found what looks like recently abandoned equipment, some kind of pumping mechanism partially hidden under camouflage netting. Definitely not authorized park equipment." Thomas frowned. "Document it, but don't touch anything. Could be related to drug operations." "Copy that. We're continuing the search for the bull." As they pushed deeper into the swamp, Bobby felt a growing sense of dread. The terrain was becoming increasingly difficult, with patches of seemingly solid ground giving way to knee-deep mud without warning. If Atlas had wandered into one of the deeper mud pits. "Wait," Sam said suddenly, raising her hand. "Listen." They fell silent, and then Bobby heard it, a distant, low bellow that couldn't be mistaken for anything but a bull in distress. "Atlas!" he shouted, starting to move toward the sound. "Wait!" Thomas grabbed his arm. "That could be a mud pit area. We need to approach carefully." The sound came again, weaker this time but unmistakable. Bobby felt his heart constrict. Atlas was alive, but the fading strength of his call suggested he was in serious trouble. They altered their course, moving as quickly as safety allowed toward the source of the sound. As they pushed through a dense stand of cypress, the landscape opened up into a clearing of sorts, a wide, mud-filled depression surrounded by stunted trees. And there, in the center, was Atlas. Bobby's breath caught in his throat. The massive bull was trapped in thick, viscous mud up to his chest, his once proud head hanging low with exhaustion. He had clearly been struggling for hours, and every movement only seemed to sink him deeper. "Atlas!" Bobby called, his voice breaking. The bull's head jerked up at the sound of the familiar voice, a weak bellow answering. But what shocked all three of them into momentary silence was what surrounded Atlas. "What in God's name?" Thomas whispered. Hundreds, perhaps thousands, of leeches were moving in the water around Atlas, forming what appeared to be a living ring around the trapped bull. Rather than attacking the vulnerable animal, they seemed to be creating a barrier between Atlas and the surrounding mud. "I've never seen behavior like this," Sam said, already pulling out sample containers and her camera. "Medicinal leeches shouldn't be swarming like this." But Bobby wasn't interested in the leech's unusual behavior. All he cared about was the rapidly weakening bull at the center of this bizarre scene. "We need to get him out," he said urgently. "Now!" Thomas was already assessing the situation with the practiced eye of someone who had performed difficult rescues before. "The mud's too deep for us to reach him directly." We'll need to create a stable platform, then use winches to pull him out. He doesn't have time for all that, Bobby argued, already removing his boots. Stop, Thomas commanded. You go in there, you'll just give us 2 victims to rescue instead of 1. That's quicksand-type mud. It looks solid, but it'll pull you under in minutes. The desperation on Bobby's face must have moved even the pragmatic ranger because his tone softened. We'll save your bull, Mr. Miller. But we do it the right way, or we don't do it at all. As Thomas radioed the other team for additional equipment, Sam continued studying the leech's behavior, taking water samples from various distances around Atlas. This isn't normal, she muttered, examining a test strip she'd dipped in the water. These readings are off the charts. But Bobby had eyes only for Atlas, who was watching him with an exhausted gaze that seemed to hold both recognition and a plea for help. The bull had stopped struggling, perhaps instinctively knowing that movement only hastened his descent into the mud. "Hang on, boy," Bobby called, his voice thick with emotion. "We're going to get you out. I promise." While they waited for the second team to arrive with additional rescue equipment, Bobby kept talking to Atlas in a steady, reassuring voice. The massive bull had stopped struggling, seeming to understand that movement only hastened his descent into the treacherous mud. His intelligent eyes remained fixed on Bobby, occasionally blinking slowly as if fighting exhaustion. "The fact that he's still conscious after all this time is remarkable," Sam observed, continuing to collect samples from the water and mud around the trapped animal. "Most large animals would have given up by now." "Atlas isn't most animals," Bobby replied, not taking his eyes off the bull. "Linda, my late wife, always said he had more heart than sense." Thomas returned from setting up a more stable position at the edge of the muddy depression. "The other team is about 20 minutes out. They're bringing inflatable platforms and the winch system." "He might not have 20 minutes, Bobby said, his voice tightening as he watched Atlas's head droop lower. Sam had been studying the strange behavior of the leeches through her field binoculars, her expression growing increasingly puzzled. "These are definitely Hirudo medicinalis, medicinal leeches. They're extremely rare in the wild now, especially in Florida. I've never seen a concentration like this." "Why aren't they attacking him?" Thomas asked, professional curiosity momentarily overriding his focus on the rescue. "I don't know," Sam admitted. "It's almost like they're protecting him somehow." She frowned at her water testing kit. "And these readings are concerning—" The water around Atlas shows unusual chemical concentrations, but only on the outer perimeter, not where the leeches are congregated. Bobby barely registered their conversation, his attention fixed on Atlas, whose breathing had become more labored. The bull was clearly reaching the limits of his considerable strength. Years of memories flashed through Bobby's mind. The scrawny calf he'd nursed back to health. The young bull who would follow him around the pasture like an oversized dog. The gentle giant who would lower his massive head for the children who occasionally visited the ranch. "I can't just stand here," Bobby said suddenly, moving toward his pack. "What are you doing?" Thomas asked sharply. "I'm going to throw him a rope. If I can get it around his horns, maybe we can at least keep him from sinking further until your team arrives." Thomas started to object, then seemed to reconsider. "The mud's too thick for a rope to help pull him out, but it might give him something to focus on. Just don't try to pull. That could injure his neck." Bobby nodded, already uncoiling the length of rope he carried in his pack. He fashioned a large loop and weighted it with his pocket knife for the throw. "Atlas," he called, his voice firm. "Look here, boy." The bull's ears twitched forward at the familiar command. Bobby swung the rope carefully, then let it fly with practiced precision from years of ranch work. The loop sailed over the intervening mud and landed perfectly across Atlas's broad horns. "Good boy," Bobby encouraged as Atlas remained still, seeming to understand the rope's purpose. "Just hold on." Thomas's radio crackled with the welcome news that the second team was approaching with the rescue equipment. Jessica's voice came through tight with concern. "We can see you up ahead. How's Atlas?" "Hanging in there," Thomas replied. "But hurry." While they waited, Sam continued her investigation of the unusual scene, collecting more samples and taking photographs. Bobby noticed her frowning at something beyond Atlas, deeper in the swamp. "What is it?" he asked. Sam pointed. "There's something metal reflecting sunlight about 50 yards past Atlas. I can just barely see it through the trees." Thomas raised his binoculars, scanning the area Sam indicated. "Looks like some kind of pipe or drainage system. Definitely not natural, and I don't recall any authorized infrastructure in this section of the basin." Before they could discuss it further, Jessica and the rest of the team arrived, carrying collapsed platforms, ropes, and a portable winch system. The ranger named Marcus whistled low when he saw Atlas's predicament. "That's one hell of a bull," he said. "Never seen anything that size in a domestic breed." "Brahmans can get up to 2,400 pounds, Jessica explained, already assessing Atlas with a veterinarian's eye. "He's in shock, Dad. We need to move quickly." Kyle, the youngest ranger, was staring at the ring of leeches surrounding Atlas. "What's with the leeches? I've never seen them behave like that." "Questions later," Thomas directed. "Let's focus on the rescue. Kyle, Marcus, start assembling the floating platforms. We need to create a stable path to reach the bull." They worked with the efficiency of a team accustomed to emergency situations, inflating sections of specialized rescue platforms designed to distribute weight across unstable surfaces. Once secured together, they created a narrow but sturdy path extending from solid ground toward Atlas. "I'm going out there," Jessica said, gathering medical supplies into a waterproof bag. Bobby started to object, but she cut him off with a look so reminiscent of her mother that the words died in his throat. "He needs fluids and anti-inflammatory medication immediately. I'm the only vet here." Thomas nodded reluctantly. "Sam, go with her. The platform should support both of you if you move carefully. Stay on your hands and knees to distribute your weight." The two women began the painstaking journey across the floating path toward Atlas, who watched their approach with wary exhaustion. Bobby held his breath with each careful movement they made, acutely aware that any mistake could send them into the same deadly trap that held Atlas. "Easy, big guy," Jessica called softly as they drew closer. "Remember me? I'm here to help." To Bobby's amazement, the leeches parted as the rescue platform approached, maintaining their strange circular formation but allowing access to the trapped bull. It was as if they somehow understood the rescue attempt was underway. Jessica reached Atlas first, immediately checking his vital signs while Sam stabilized the platform around them. "His pulse is rapid but strong," Jessica called back. "Respiration labored but regular. He's dehydrated but still fighting." She administered injections of fluids and medication, speaking soothingly to Atlas throughout. The bull remained remarkably calm despite his dire situation, his eyes occasionally seeking out Bobby at the shoreline. "The mud has him like concrete," Sam reported after carefully examining how Atlas was trapped. "It's almost like quicksand, but thicker. Every time he struggled, he sank deeper." "Can we pull him out with the winch?" Thomas called. Sam and Jessica exchanged concerned glances. "It's risky," Jessica replied. "The suction is so strong it could dislocate his shoulders or hips if we pull too hard." "We need to break the suction somehow." While they discussed options, Bobby noticed Mike staring intently toward the same metallic reflection Sam had spotted earlier. "I'm going to check that out," Mike said quietly to Bobby. "Something's not right about this whole situation." "Be careful," Bobby warned. "This swamp is treacherous enough without adding mysteries." Mike nodded and slipped away, moving cautiously through the cypress trees toward the glinting metal. Bobby returned his attention to the rescue effort, where Thomas and Kyle were now carefully extending a second platform alongside Atlas to position the winch system. "We'll need to get straps under his chest and hindquarters," Thomas explained. "Once the straps are secure, we'll try to pump water around him to loosen the mud's grip before we start pulling." The next hour was a careful choreography of desperate measures. The team worked to position wide nylon straps beneath Atlas's body, a nearly impossible task given how deeply he was embedded in the mud. Through it all, the bull remained surprisingly cooperative, as if he understood their efforts were his only chance at survival. Sam continued to monitor the strange leech behavior, occasionally collecting more water samples. "The water quality gets worse the further from Atlas we test," she noted. "It's almost as if—" Her thought was interrupted by Mike's return. His expression was grim as he approached Bobby. "You need to see this," he said in a low voice. "There's a large drainage pipe about 50 yards deeper in. It's pumping some kind of black sludge directly into the basin." Bobby's eyes narrowed. "Industrial waste dumping?" "Looks like it," Mike confirmed. "And based on the setup, it's been happening for some time." "Professional equipment, carefully hidden." Thomas overheard their conversation and joined them, his expression hardening. "Illegal dumping in a protected wetland is a federal offense. Did you see any identifying markings on the equipment?" Mike nodded. "That's the interesting part. The pumps have Blackwood Industries logos on them. Victor Blackwood's company." The name hit Bobby like a physical blow. Victor Blackwood was one of the wealthiest men in the county, owner of a chemical manufacturing company with facilities throughout the state. He was also the man who'd been pressuring Bobby to sell Millbrook Ranch for the past 2 years, making increasingly aggressive offers that Bobby had consistently refused. "Blackwood," Bobby repeated, the pieces suddenly falling into place. "The attempted rustling wasn't random. He wanted Atlas gone because he's our last chance to save the ranch." Thomas looked skeptical. "That's a serious accusation, Mr. Miller." "Victor Blackwood is a powerful man in this region, and the perfect person to be dumping chemicals illegally," Sam added, joining the conversation. "His company has been cited for environmental violations before, but the fines are just a cost of doing business for him." Jessica called from the platform, interrupting their discussion. "We're ready to try the extraction." Bobby hurried back to the edge of the mud pit, where the rescue team had positioned the winch system and attached it to the straps now secured around Atlas's body. The bull's eyes found Bobby's, and for a moment, man and animal seemed to communicate without words. "We'll go slow," Thomas instructed, taking position at the winch controls. "The mud suction is the biggest danger. Jessica, monitor his vitals constantly. At the first sign of distress, we stop immediately." Jessica nodded, one hand resting reassuringly on Atlas's massive neck, while the other remained ready with additional medications if needed. Sam had positioned herself to monitor the straps, ensuring they wouldn't slip or cause injury as tension increased. "Starting extraction," Thomas announced, beginning to take up the slack in the winch cables. The straps tightened, and Atlas let out a low groan as the pressure began to pull against the mud's powerful grip. Bobby found himself holding his breath, his hands clenched into tight fists at his sides. The bull's life, and with it, the future of Millbrook Ranch, hung literally in the balance. "Easy," Thomas murmured, gradually increasing the tension. "Easy does it." For several heart-stopping moments, nothing seemed to happen. The winch strained against the mud's hold, cables taut as bowstrings, but Atlas remained firmly trapped. Then, with agonizing slowness, there came the faint sucking sound of mud beginning to release its grip. "It's working!" Jessica called, excitement bleeding into her professional composure. "His right shoulder is coming free!" Bobby felt a surge of hope, quickly tempered by the knowledge that they were far from safe. Atlas still had most of his massive body embedded in the treacherous mud, and the process of breaking the suction had clearly caused him pain despite Jessica's medications. As the rescue continued its painstaking progress, Sam suddenly straightened, her attention caught by something in the water. The ring of leeches, which had maintained their bizarre formation throughout the rescue attempt, had begun to move in unison, flowing away from Atlas toward the direction of the drainage pipe Mike had discovered. "Something's changing," she said, concern evident in her voice. "The water flow is increasing." Mike turned to look toward the hidden drainage pipe, then cursed under his breath. "Someone's there! I can see movement through the trees!" Before anyone could respond, a new sound reached them, the distant rumble of an airboat engine starting up. Thomas immediately grabbed his radio. "Kyle, take the Jeep back to the entry point. Someone may be fleeing the scene at the drainage site. Possible environmental crime in progress." As Kyle rushed off, the remaining team refocused on the extraction effort. The winch continued its steady pull, and inch by agonizing inch, Atlas's massive body began to emerge from the mud's grip. The bull's breathing was labored but steady, his eyes never leaving Bobby's face. "You're doing great, boy," Bobby encouraged, his own voice rough with emotion. "Just a little more." The extraction had reached a critical point when Sam suddenly shouted in alarm. The water level around them was noticeably rising, and a dark, oily substance was spreading across the surface from the direction of the drainage pipe. "They've opened the flow completely," she cried. "They're trying to destroy evidence." Thomas cursed, immediately recognizing the new danger. "The mud pit will become even more unstable with increased water flow. We need to accelerate the extraction." He increased the winch's power, causing Atlas to bellow in pain as the pressure on his body intensified. Jessica administered another injection to help with the pain, her face set in determined lines. "It's now or never," she said grimly. "The mud's consistency is changing with the new flow. If we don't get him out now, we might lose him." Bobby couldn't stand it any longer. Despite Thomas's earlier warnings, he moved onto the rescue platform, crawling carefully until he reached Atlas's head. The bull's eyes, glazed with exhaustion and pain, focused on him with unmistakable recognition. "Come on, Atlas," Bobby urged, placing his hand on the bull's massive head. "Help us, help you. One more try, boy. Push with everything you've got when I tell you." As if understanding perfectly, Atlas's muscles tensed beneath the mud. Bobby nodded to Thomas, who increased the winch power once more. "Now, Atlas," Bobby commanded. "Push!" With a bellow that seemed to shake the very air around them, Atlas gathered his remaining strength and heaved forward as the winch pulled. For one terrible moment nothing happened. Then, with a great sucking sound, the mud released its grip and Atlas lurched forward, his massive hindquarters finally breaking free of the deadly trap. The sudden movement nearly capsized the rescue platforms, but Sam and Jessica stabilized them quickly. Atlas lay half on the platform, half in shallow water, his sides heaving with exhaustion, but his body finally free of the mud's deadly embrace. A cheer went up from the rescue team, quickly followed by urgent activity as they secured the platforms to begin the delicate process of moving Atlas back to solid ground. The bull was too weak to stand, but still conscious, a promising sign after his ordeal. As Jessica continued to monitor Atlas's condition, Bobby turned his attention to the approaching dark slick that was spreading across the water. The leeches that had formed the protective ring around Atlas were now dispersing rapidly, some heading deeper into the swamp, others clustering along the edges of the rescue platforms. "What is that stuff?" he asked Sam, who was collecting samples of the dark liquid. Her expression was grim as she sealed a vial of the substance. "Without lab testing, I can't be certain, but based on the smell and consistency, it's likely industrial chemical waste, probably containing heavy metals and organic solvents, extremely toxic to wetland ecosystems." And illegal as hell to dump here, Thomas added, his jaw tight with anger. Whoever's behind this just escalated from environmental citations to federal charges. Bobby looked at the spreading contamination, then back at Atlas, who lay exhausted but alive on the rescue platform. The leeches, he said slowly. They weren't just acting strange, they were protecting him from the chemicals. Sam nodded thoughtfully. Medicinal leeches are extremely sensitive to water quality. They likely moved away from the contaminated areas and congregated where the water was still relatively clean, around Atlas. In doing so, they may have actually created a barrier that slowed the spread of contaminants to where he was trapped. A symbiotic relationship, Jessica marveled, continuing to administer fluids to Atlas. They protected him, and his body heat and relative stability in the mud provided them sanctuary from the spreading chemicals. Mike rejoined them, having scouted further along the edge of the mud pit. "The flow is increasing," he reported grimly. "Whoever was at the controls has opened the valves completely. It looks like they're trying to flush out the entire system." "Destroying evidence," Thomas concluded, reaching for his radio to update headquarters. "We need EPA officials out here immediately. This is going to be a major environmental crime scene." As they carefully began the process of moving Atlas to stable ground, Bobby couldn't help but reflect on the bizarre chain of events that had led them here. What had begun as a desperate search for his prized bull had uncovered what appeared to be a systematic poisoning of Cooper's Basin, and possibly a direct attack on Millbrook Ranch itself. Looking at Atlas's mud-covered form, Bobby felt a surge of fierce pride. The bull's protective instinct toward the calf had led him into danger, but that same instinct might have just saved the entire ecosystem of Cooper's Basin from silent destruction. Sometimes, Bobby thought, the most unexpected heroes came in the most unexpected forms. What none of them realized as they focused on stabilizing Atlas and documenting the spreading contamination was that they were being watched. Through high-powered binoculars from the concealment of a distant airboat, Victor Blackwood observed the rescue operation with cold calculation, already planning his next move in a game that had suddenly become far more complicated than he had anticipated. Moving Atlas from the floating platforms to solid ground proved to be almost as challenging as extracting him from the mud. The massive bull could barely stand, his legs trembling with exhaustion after hours of struggle. The team worked together, using the winch system to slide him carefully across the connected platforms while maintaining his stability. "Easy now," Thomas directed as they approached the shoreline. "We need a gradual transition to solid ground." Bobby stayed near Atlas's head, speaking in low, reassuring tones. The bull's eyes, though glazed with fatigue, remained fixed on Bobby's face, drawing strength from the familiar presence. Jessica continued monitoring his vital signs, administering additional fluids when needed. "His temperature is elevated, and his respiration is still too rapid," she reported, professional concern evident in her voice. "But considering what he's been through, he's remarkably stable." By mid-afternoon, they had successfully moved Atlas to a relatively dry area at the edge of the swamp. The bull lay on his side, too weak to stand, but conscious and responsive. His silver-gray coat, once gleaming, was now covered in black mud that Jessica carefully began washing away to check for injuries. While the immediate rescue had been accomplished, a new crisis was unfolding around them. Kyle had returned with news that the suspects at the drainage site had escaped on an airboat, but not before opening the valves to maximum flow. The dark chemical waste was now spreading visibly through this section of Cooper's Basin, an environmental disaster in progress. "I've called in every available ranger and environmental officer," Thomas said grimly, studying the latest water samples Sam had collected. "EPA emergency response team is en route, but they're at least 3 hours out." Sam was coordinating with other biologists by satellite phone, her expression growing more concerned with each conversation. "The contamination is spreading faster than we anticipated. These chemicals break down the natural barriers in the swamp ecosystem. If we don't contain this quickly, it could reach the aquifer. Bobby, though still deeply worried about Atlas, couldn't ignore the larger catastrophe unfolding around them. Is there anything we can do to slow it down? Without specialized equipment, not much, Sam admitted. The best we can do is document everything thoroughly for the investigation and prepare containment strategies for when backup arrives. Mike had been studying the drainage system they'd discovered, taking photographs and making notes. He approached the group with a troubled expression. "This setup isn't temporary," he reported. "Based on the infrastructure and growth around the pipes, they've been dumping here for months, maybe years, but very carefully. Small amounts at regular intervals that would be hard to detect without specific testing. Until today," Thomas added, "when they opened everything wide." "Because we discovered it," Bobby concluded, anger building inside him. "They're destroying evidence, and they don't care what damage they cause in the process." Jessica looked up from tending to Atlas. "Dad, we need to get him to a veterinary facility as soon as possible. He needs more intensive care than I can provide here." Bobby nodded, the competing crises pulling him in different directions. Atlas needed immediate medical attention, but he couldn't simply walk away from the environmental disaster their discovery had triggered, especially if Victor Blackwood was behind it all. Thomas seemed to sense his dilemma. "Mr. Miller, our priority is saving lives, human and animal. My team will handle the environmental response. You need to focus on getting your bull the care he needs." "How?" Bobby gestured helplessly. "He can't walk, and we can't exactly call a tow truck out here." Thomas considered the problem. "The access road is about half a mile from here. If we can get Atlas stable enough to stand, we might be able to guide him there using the winch and a series of support straps." It was a desperate plan, but they had few options. Jessica quickly outlined what medical support Atlas would need to make the journey, while Kyle and Marcus began modifying their equipment to create a makeshift harness system. As they worked, Sam continued collecting evidence, paying particular attention to the medicinal leeches that had played such an unexpected role in Atlas's survival. Many of the leeches had attached themselves to fallen branches and vegetation at the water's edge, retreating from the spreading contamination. "These leeches are incredibly valuable from both a scientific and medical perspective," she explained, carefully collecting specimens. "They're almost extinct in the wild, yet somehow a thriving population has survived here in Cooper's Basin, at least until now." Bobby watched her work, a thought forming. Could the leeches be why Blackwood chose this particular location for dumping? If they're valuable, Sam nodded slowly. It's possible. Medicinal leeches are worth a lot in the pharmaceutical industry. Wiping out a natural population would increase the value of captive-bred specimens. "So it's not just about getting me to sell my ranch," Bobby said bitterly. "It's about destroying a natural resource for profit." Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion as Atlas suddenly attempted to rise, his massive legs struggling to find purchase in the soft ground. Jessica and Mike rushed to his side, trying to steady him. "Easy, boy," Bobby called, hurrying over. "Don't try to stand yet." But Atlas seemed determined, a new urgency in his movements. Despite his exhaustion, the bull managed to get his front legs under him, raising his head and focusing on something beyond the group. His nostrils flared, and he let out a low, rumbling sound that Bobby recognized as his alert call. "Something's wrong," Bobby said, instinctively trusting the bull's senses. "He's warning us." Thomas scanned the surrounding swamp, hand moving to the sidearm he carried. "Could be an alligator. They're attracted to distress and unusual activity." Mike shook his head, also on alert. "That's not it. Listen." They fell silent, and in the distance, they could hear the faint sound of an airboat engine approaching. "Back up already?" Kyle suggested. "Too soon," Thomas replied, his expression hardening. "And our teams would radio ahead." Sam quickly began securing her samples and evidence, a grim look on her face. If it's the people responsible for the dumping, they might be coming back to ensure they've covered their tracks. Thomas immediately took charge, his training kicking in. Kyle, Marcus, get the evidence and critical gear loaded and ready to move. Sam, finish collecting your samples. Jessica, what's Atlas's condition? Stabilizing, but still critical, she answered. Moving him now would be risky. We may not have a choice, Bobby said, watching Atlas's continued attempts to rise. The bull seemed agitated, his instincts clearly telling him something the humans were still figuring out. The sound of the airboat grew louder, and Thomas made a decision. Miller, you and Jessica stay with Atlas. Try to keep him calm and out of sight in those cypress trees. The rest of us will intercept whoever's coming. Bobby nodded, helping Jessica guide Atlas toward the partial concealment offered by a stand of cypress trees. The bull moved with painful slowness, each step clearly an enormous effort, but his determination was unmistakable. What's driving him? Jessica wondered aloud as they settled Atlas in the shade. He should be completely exhausted. Protection, Bobby said simply. He knows something's wrong and he's trying to protect us, just like he protected that calf. From their position, they could see Thomas and the others taking up strategic positions along the shoreline, weapons ready but out of sight. The airboat sound grew steadily louder until finally the vessel came into view around a bend in the waterway. Bobby's jaw tightened as he recognized the man standing at the controls. Victor Blackwood was unmistakable even at a distance, tall, silver-haired, with the confident posture of a man accustomed to power. He was accompanied by three men whose stances and alertness suggested they weren't simply business associates. That's him, Bobby whispered to Jessica. Blackwood himself. The airboat slowed as it approached the area where they had rescued Atlas. Blackwood surveyed the scene, clearly noting the rescue equipment still scattered around the mud pit. He spoke to one of his companions, who raised a pair of binoculars and began scanning the shoreline. Thomas stepped out from his position, his ranger uniform clearly visible. "Wildlife Management Services," he called across the water. "Please cut your engine and identify yourselves." Blackwood's response was smooth, practiced. "Victor Blackwood, just checking on reports of unusual activity in this section of the basin. My company has conservation interests in this area." "Interests?" Sam muttered from her nearby position. "Like dumping toxic waste?" Thomas maintained a professional demeanor. "This is now an active investigation site, Mr. Blackwood. I'll need you to move your vessel back and clear the area." A tense silence followed as Blackwood considered the ranger's order. His eyes scanned the shoreline, eventually settling on the partial equipment concealment where Bobby and Jessica tended to Atlas. A cold smile crossed his face. "Of course, Ranger," he replied smoothly. "We wouldn't want to interfere with official business, though I am concerned about reports of trespassing on this protected wetland." "The only trespassing happening here is your illegal drainage operation," Thomas replied, his patience visibly thinning. "Now please clear the area immediately." Blackwood's expression hardened momentarily before smoothing back into practiced civility. "We'll be on our way, but I should mention that my company has exclusive research rights to certain aspects of this ecosystem. Any samples removed without proper authorization would be a violation of our contractual agreements with the state." Sam stepped forward, unable to contain herself. "Research rights don't include poisoning the entire basin, Mr. Blackwood." The businessman's eyes narrowed at Sam, then shifted back to Thomas. "Serious accusations require serious evidence, Ranger. I hope your team understands the legal implications of unfounded claims." Before Thomas could respond, a commotion from the cypress stand drew everyone's attention. Atlas, somehow finding reserves of strength that should have been impossible, had struggled to his feet and was now moving slowly but deliberately toward the shoreline, directly facing Blackwood's airboat. The massive bull cut an imposing figure despite his weakened state. Mud-covered and battle-worn, He lowered his head slightly, his horns catching the afternoon sunlight. His eyes were fixed on Blackwood with an intensity that seemed almost human in its focus. "Atlas, no!" Bobby called, rushing after him. But the bull continued his determined advance until he stood at the water's edge, a living barrier between Blackwood and the evidence of his crimes. A low, rumbling sound emanated from his chest, not quite a bellow, but a clear warning. The effect on Blackwood was immediate and surprising. The composed businessman actually took a step back on his airboat, his face showing a flash of what looked remarkably like fear before he regained his composure. "That's the bull that was missing from your ranch, isn't it, Miller?" Blackwood called, his voice carrying across the water. "Remarkable that you found him all the way out here." "More remarkable what we found with him," Bobby replied, standing beside Atlas now, one hand resting on the bull's massive shoulder. "Your illegal dumping operation ends today, Blackwood." Something dangerous flickered in Blackwood's eyes. He leaned closer to one of his companions, speaking words too low to carry across the water. The man nodded and moved his hand toward what was almost certainly a concealed weapon. Thomas saw it too. "Federal officers approaching!" he shouted suddenly, raising his own weapon. "Hands where we can see them!" For a tense moment it seemed the confrontation might escalate into violence. Then the distant sound of actual helicopter rotors broke the standoff. Blackwood's calculation was visible in his expression, weighing options, considering consequences. "We're leaving," he announced finally, signaling his men to stand down. "But this isn't over, Miller. Not by a long shot." The airboat's engine roared to life, and Blackwood executed a sharp turn, spraying water toward the shore before accelerating away into the swamp. Thomas immediately radioed the approaching aerial units, giving them Blackwood's direction of travel and description. As the airboat disappeared from view, Atlas's legs finally gave out. The bull sank to his knees, then his side, his momentary burst of energy completely depleted. Bobby and Jessica rushed to his aid, checking his vital signs with growing concern. "His pulse is erratic," Jessica reported urgently. "The exertion was too much after everything he's been through." Bobby knelt beside Atlas's massive head, cradling it in his lap as he had done years ago when Atlas was just a sickly calf fighting to survive. "Don't you dare give up now, boy," he whispered fiercely. "Not after everything you've done." Atlas's eyes, those intelligent eyes that had always seemed to understand more than any animal should, fixed on Bobby's face. His breathing was labored, each breath a visible struggle as his massive chest heaved. Thomas and Sam joined them, both looking concerned at Atlas's deteriorating condition. "The helicopter will be here in 10 minutes, Thomas said. "They can airlift him out if necessary." "He might not have 10 minutes, Jessica replied, administering emergency medications from her kit. "His system is shutting down from the combination of exhaustion, stress, and toxic exposure." Bobby felt a wave of despair threatening to overwhelm him. After everything, the daring rescue, the discovery of Blackwood's operation, Atlas's incredible display of protective instinct, to lose him now seemed unbearably cruel. "What about the leeches?" Sam suddenly suggested. "They seemed to be protecting him from the worst of the toxins while he was trapped." "What are you suggesting?" Jessica asked, looking up from her work. "Medicinal leeches are still used in modern medicine," Sam explained quickly. "They have anticoagulant properties and can improve blood flow to damaged tissues. If Atlas has been exposed to toxins, they might help remove some of the contaminants from his bloodstream." Jessica looked skeptical. "That's experimental at best." "We don't know what chemicals he's been exposed to or how they might interact. But we know the leeches survived in these conditions," Sam countered. "And they formed a protective barrier around him for hours. There's a connection we don't fully understand yet." Bobby looked from Atlas's laboring form to the remaining leeches that had retreated to the water's edge as the contamination spread. It was a desperate measure, but they were in a desperate situation. Do it, he decided. If there's any chance it might help him, we have to try. Sam quickly collected several of the medicinal leeches in a clean container, bringing them to where Atlas lay. Jessica, though clearly uncomfortable with the unorthodox treatment, identified areas where the leeches might do the most good, regions with visible inflammation and poor circulation. "I can't believe we're doing this," she muttered, as Sam carefully applied the first leech to a swollen area on Atlas's shoulder. The bull flinched slightly at the contact, but didn't resist. One by one, Sam positioned the leeches at strategic points, working quickly but carefully. Thomas and the other rangers watched in fascinated silence, this procedure clearly outside their emergency response training. For several tense minutes, nothing seemed to change. Atlas's breathing remained labored, his pulse irregular. Bobby continued speaking to him softly, words of encouragement mixed with memories of their years together. "Remember when that summer storm knocked down the east fence?" he reminisced, his voice thick with emotion. "You rounded up the entire herd before I even knew they were loose. Never seen anything like it." Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, Atlas's breathing began to even out. The leeches, now fully attached, pulsed slightly as they worked. Jessica, monitoring his vital signs, looked up in surprise. "His pulse is stabilizing," she reported, disbelief evident in her voice. "And his respiration is becoming more regular." Sam nodded, a cautious hope in her expression. "The leeches secrete compounds that improve blood flow and reduce inflammation. They may be drawing out some of the toxins or at least improving his circulation enough for his own systems to recover." The sound of approaching helicopter rotors grew louder, and Thomas moved to coordinate their arrival. Kyle and Marcus were securing a landing zone in a clearing nearby, while Mike continued documenting the drainage system and collecting evidence. As the helicopter touched down, medical and environmental response teams poured out, bringing with them specialized equipment for both Atlas's treatment and containment of the spreading contamination. A veterinary trauma team immediately took over Atlas's care, their initial skepticism at the leech treatment giving way to professional curiosity as they observed the bull's improving condition. "We need to transport him to our facility immediately," the lead veterinarian told Bobby after examining Atlas. "He's stabilizing, but he's not out of danger yet." Bobby nodded, relief and worry battling within him. "I'll come with him." As they prepared Atlas for transport, securing him carefully to a specialized lifting apparatus that would carry him to a waiting trailer, Bobby found himself standing next to Thomas and Sam. "Thank you," he said simply, "for believing me, for helping save him." Thomas nodded, his professional reserve softening slightly. "That's one remarkable animal you've got there, Mr. Miller. And what he led us to discover may end up saving this entire ecosystem." Sam was carefully packing her samples, her expression thoughtful. "The relationship between Atlas and those leeches, it's something I've never seen documented before. A kind of spontaneous symbiosis that developed under extreme conditions. Sometimes the most unexpected alliances form when survival is at stake," Bobby observed, watching as the medical team worked on Atlas. The bull's eyes remained open, watching everything happening around him with that same intelligent awareness that had always set him apart. When his gaze met Bobby's, there was a recognition there that transcended the usual boundaries between human and animal. As they finally began moving Atlas toward the waiting helicopter, Bobby walked alongside, one hand resting on the bull's massive shoulder. Behind them, environmental teams were already deploying containment booms to slow the spread of contamination, while evidence collection teams documented every aspect of Blackwood's illegal operation. What had begun as a desperate search for a valued animal had uncovered an environmental crime of staggering proportions. And at the center of it all was Atlas, a bull who had charged into danger to protect a calf, only to end up protecting an entire ecosystem through his remarkable will to survive. The helicopter lifted off with Atlas secured below in the special harness, Bobby and Jessica accompanying him in the aircraft. As they rose above Cooper's Basin, Bobby could see the full extent of what they had discovered: the hidden pipes, the spreading contamination, and the teams now racing to contain the damage. He also saw, just disappearing around a distant bend in the waterway, Victor Blackwood's airboat heading toward the private dock at his estate. This confrontation was far from over, Bobby knew. But for now, his focus was entirely on the brave bull who had started it all, and whose fight for survival was still not finished. The emergency veterinary facility at the University of Florida's large animal hospital sprang into action the moment the helicopter touched down. A team of specialists waited on the landing pad, led by Dr. Eleanor Walsh, one of the country's foremost experts in large animal emergency medicine. Bobby watched anxiously as they transferred Atlas onto a reinforced gurney designed specifically for animals of his size. "We've been briefed on his condition," Dr. Walsh told Bobby and Jessica as they hurried alongside the gurney. "The toxic exposure is our primary concern, along with potential organ damage from prolonged stress and dehydration." The next few hours passed in a blur of medical terminology and tense waiting. Atlas was moved to a specialized treatment area where the team could work on his massive frame. Blood samples were rushed to the lab, ultrasounds performed, and IVs established to deliver fluids and medications. Through it all, Bobby remained as close as the medical team would allow, a constant presence in Atlas's line of sight. "Talk to him," Dr. Walsh suggested during a brief break in procedures. "Familiar voices can help reduce stress hormones, which is critical right now." Bobby didn't need to be told twice. He positioned himself near Atlas's head, speaking in the same low, steady voice he'd used for years when working with the bull. "You're going to be fine, boy," he said, trying to project a confidence he didn't entirely feel. "These folks know what they're doing. You just rest and let them help you." Atlas's eyes, though dulled by medication, focused on Bobby. The bull was too weak to move his head, but his ears twitched slightly at the familiar voice. Jessica joined her father, her veterinary training giving her a better understanding of Atlas's condition than Bobby could grasp. "His kidneys are struggling to filter the toxins," she explained quietly. "And there's inflammation in his lungs from inhaling the chemical vapors." "But he's fighting," Bobby stated, more wish than question. Jessica nodded, squeezing her father's shoulder. "He's fighting harder than any animal I've ever seen." As evening approached, Mike arrived at the hospital, having driven directly from Cooper's Basin once the immediate evidence collection was complete. His expression was grim as he found Bobby in the waiting area during one of the medical team's assessments. "How is he?" Mike asked, genuine concern in his voice. Atlas wasn't just Bobby's bull. He'd been a fixture at Millbrook for years, almost a mascot to everyone who worked there. "Holding his own," Bobby replied, the exhaustion of the day finally catching up with him. "What's happening at the basin?" Mike sat heavily in the chair beside Bobby. "It's bad. The EPA has declared it a Level 1 environmental emergency." The chemicals Blackwood was dumping are some nasty stuff: industrial solvents, heavy metals, chemical byproducts from his manufacturing processes. They've evacuated a 2-mile radius around the site. Bobby closed his eyes briefly, the magnitude of what they'd uncovered sinking in. "Any sign of Blackwood?" "That's the other thing," Mike said, lowering his voice. "He's gone completely on the offensive. His lawyers are already claiming the drainage system was installed by a subcontractor without his knowledge. He's even had the nerve to announce a personal donation to the cleanup effort." "Of course he has," Bobby muttered, anger momentarily displacing worry, trying to control the narrative. Mike nodded. But here's what he doesn't know yet. Thomas and Sam found documentation in the pumping station. Maintenance logs with Blackwood's signature. Dated schedules for the dumping operations. The EPA investigators are building a case, but they need time. Their conversation was interrupted as Dr. Walsh approached, her expression serious but not defeated. "Mr. Miller, we've completed our initial assessment and treatment protocols." Bobby stood immediately, his heart pounding. "And?" "Atlas has sustained significant toxic exposure, primarily affecting his renal and respiratory systems. We've started dialysis to help his kidneys process the toxins, and we're administering oxygen therapy for his lungs." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "I want to be straightforward with you. Animals his size rarely survive this kind of systemic shock. The next 12 hours will be critical." Bobby felt the floor seem to shift beneath him. Despite all the visible signs of Atlas's distress, some part of him had refused to believe that the bull might not recover. Atlas had always been a survivor, from the sickly calf Bobby had bottle-fed to the powerful bull who had become the cornerstone of Millbrook Ranch. "What are his chances?" he managed to ask. Dr. Walsh didn't sugarcoat her response. "Medically speaking, less than 30%. The combination of physical exhaustion, toxic exposure, and the stress of rescue has pushed his systems to the breaking point." Jessica, who had joined them, asked the question Bobby couldn't bring himself to voice. "Are we being cruel by continuing treatment? Is he suffering?" The veterinarian considered this carefully. "He's sedated to minimize discomfort, and his neurological responses don't indicate severe pain. But there is suffering, yes. The question is whether it's justified by a reasonable chance of recovery." Bobby felt the weight of an impossible decision settling on his shoulders. Atlas was more than livestock to him. He was a companion, almost family. The thought of losing him was devastating, but the thought of prolonging his suffering was worse. "Can I see him?" Bobby asked quietly. Dr. Walsh nodded. "Of course. We're moving him to the intensive care unit now. You can sit with him once he's settled." The ICU for large animals was unlike anything Bobby had seen before. Specialized equipment surrounded Atlas's massive form, monitoring every aspect of his condition. Despite the technology and the team of experts, the bull looked terribly vulnerable lying on the reinforced medical platform, tubes and wires connecting him to various machines. Bobby approached slowly, pulling a stool close to Atlas's head. The bull's eyes were closed, his breathing shallow but regular with the help of supplemental oxygen. Bobby placed his hand gently on the bull's broad forehead, feeling the unnatural warmth of fever beneath his palm. "I'm here, boy," he said softly. Atlas's eyes opened slightly at the sound of Bobby's voice, recognition flickering in their depths despite the heavy sedation. A low rumble, barely audible, emanated from his chest. "You've done enough," Bobby continued, his voice breaking. "More than enough. You saved that calf. You exposed Blackwood's operation. You don't have to keep fighting if you're tired." A tear slid down Bobby's weathered cheek as the full weight of the situation crashed over him. Here was Atlas, who had charged fearlessly into danger to protect a vulnerable calf, now fighting for his own life. And here was Bobby, facing the prospect of losing not just his prized breeding bull, but a companion who had been his steadfast support through the darkest days after Linda's death. Jessica found him there an hour later, still talking softly to Atlas, recounting stories from their years together. She placed a gentle hand on her father's shoulder, offering silent support. "The medical team wants to try something," she said after a moment. "Sam's here. She brought something from the basin that might help." Bobby looked up, momentarily confused. "Sam? From Wildlife Management?" Jessica nodded. "She's been working with the university researchers analyzing the medicinal leeches from Cooper's Basin. They've made a discovery that might help Atlas." Hope, dangerous and fragile, flickered in Bobby's chest. What kind of discovery? The leeches produce a compound that seems to specifically target the type of toxins Blackwood was dumping, Jessica explained. The researchers think that's why they formed that protective ring around Atlas. They were actually filtering the contaminated water around him. Bobby stood, newfound energy coursing through him. "Where is she?" Sam was in a conference room with Dr. Walsh and several researchers bent over microscopes and computer screens displaying chemical analyses. She looked up as Bobby and Jessica entered, her expression cautiously optimistic. "Mr. Miller?" she greeted him. "How's Atlas doing?" "Not good," Bobby answered honestly. "Jessica says you might have something that could help him." Sam nodded, gesturing to the scientific equipment. The leeches from Cooper's Basin are a unique subspecies of Hirudo medicinalis. They've evolved specific enzymes that break down the exact chemical compounds Blackwood was dumping. One of the researchers, a young woman with intense focus, continued the explanation. "We believe the local leech population adapted to low levels of these contaminants over time, developing specialized proteins that neutralize the toxins. It's a remarkable example of evolutionary adaptation." "How does this help Atlas?" Bobby asked, cutting to the heart of the matter. Dr. Walsh stepped forward. "We've extracted and concentrated these enzymes. In theory, they could help break down the toxins in Atlas's bloodstream, giving his organs a fighting chance to recover." "In theory," Bobby repeated, catching the uncertainty in her voice. "You haven't done this before." "No," Dr. Walsh admitted. "This would be experimental treatment. The science is sound, but there are risks. The concentrated enzymes could trigger an immune response, potentially causing more harm than good." Bobby looked from face to face, reading the mixture of scientific curiosity and genuine concern. "What happens if we do nothing?" Dr. Walsh's expression softened with compassion. "Based on his latest blood work, his organs will continue to fail. We'd be looking at making him comfortable for his remaining time." The weight of the decision pressed down on Bobby. Risk an experimental treatment that might save Atlas, but could also hasten his death, or accept the inevitable decline and focus on minimizing his suffering. "What would you do?" he asked Dr. Walsh directly. "If he was your animal?" The veterinarian considered carefully before answering. "Medically, his prognosis is poor either way, but I've worked with thousands of animals, Mr. Miller, and I've never seen one with the will to survive that Atlas has shown. If any animal could benefit from this treatment, it would be him." Bobby turned to Jessica, seeking her professional opinion as both a veterinarian and as someone who knew Atlas. She met his gaze steadily. "It's a risk," she acknowledged, "but Atlas didn't hesitate to risk everything for that calf. I think we owe him the same courage." The decision crystallized in Bobby's mind. "Do it," he said firmly. "Atlas has never given up on anything in his life. We're not giving up on him now." The next few hours were a carefully orchestrated medical intervention. The team prepared the enzyme solution while monitoring Atlas's already compromised systems. Bobby remained by the bull's side throughout, a constant, reassuring presence. "This initial dose is conservative," Dr. Walsh explained as they prepared to administer the treatment. "We'll monitor his response carefully before proceeding further." Bobby nodded, his hand resting on Atlas's massive shoulder. "Hear that, boy? These folks are doing everything they can. You just keep fighting." The enzyme solution was administered slowly through Atlas's IV. For the first hour, there was no visible change in his condition. The medical team watched the monitors intently, ready to intervene at the first sign of adverse reaction. Gradually, almost imperceptibly at first, Atlas's vital signs began to shift. His oxygen levels improved slightly, and his heart rate, which had been elevated despite the sedation, began to stabilize. "It's working," one of the technicians said quietly, almost afraid to jinx their cautious success. Doctor. Walsh checked and rechecked the readings before allowing herself a small nod. His kidney function is showing marginal improvement. It's not dramatic, but it's moving in the right direction. A collective exhale seemed to pass through the room. Bobby felt tears stinging his eyes again, this time from fragile hope rather than despair. "That's it, Atlas," he encouraged softly. "Keep fighting." As midnight approached, the improvement continued. Small increments rather than dramatic recoveries, but a consistent trend in the right direction. Dr. Walsh adjusted Atlas's medications, reducing the sedation slightly to better assess his neurological function. "His reflexes are stronger," she noted, checking Atlas's responses, "and he's initiating more breathing on his own." Bobby, who had refused to leave despite Jessica's attempts to convince him to rest, felt a surge of relief so powerful it made him lightheaded. He steadied himself against Atlas's treatment platform, suddenly aware of how exhausted he truly was. "Dad, you need to rest," Jessica insisted, seeing his momentary weakness. "Atlas is stable. The medical team is with him. You won't help him by collapsing yourself." Bobby wanted to argue, but the events of the day, the desperate search, the dramatic rescue, the confrontation with Blackwood, and now the emotional roller coaster of Atlas's treatment, had drained him completely. He nodded reluctantly. "2 hours," he conceded. "And you'll wake me if anything changes?" "The second anything happens," Jessica promised. Bobby allowed himself to be led to a small break room with a couch. Despite his intention to simply rest his eyes, exhaustion claimed him instantly. His dreams were troubled. Images of Atlas sinking in mud, of Blackwood's cold smile, of the spreading contamination throughout Cooper's Basin. He woke with a start to Jessica shaking his shoulder, instantly alert. "What's happened? Is Atlas—" "He's awake," Jessica said, her eyes bright with cautious optimism. "Really awake, Dad, and he's trying to get up." Bobby was on his feet immediately, following Jessica back to the ICU. The scene that greeted him stopped him in his tracks. Atlas, though still connected to various monitoring equipment, had indeed raised his massive head, his eyes, clear and alert, in a way they hadn't been since before his ordeal, fixed on Bobby immediately. Dr. Walsh was checking his vital signs, an expression of professional amazement on her face. "His numbers are stabilizing across the board," she reported. "The enzyme treatment appears to be successfully breaking down the toxins. His own systems are beginning to compensate." Bobby approached slowly, hardly daring to believe the improvement he was seeing. "Hey there, boy," he said softly. Atlas's ears pricked forward at the familiar voice. The bull made a low rumbling sound in his chest, a sound Bobby recognized as Atlas's typical greeting. "This is remarkable," Dr. Walsh admitted. "Large animals his size rarely recover from systemic shock this severe. His will to survive is extraordinary." Bobby placed his hand on Atlas's massive head, feeling the strength already returning to the bull. "He's always been extraordinary," he said simply. As dawn broke over the hospital, the medical team continued their careful monitoring. Atlas's improvement, while not a complete recovery, had defied their medical expectations. The experimental enzyme treatment had succeeded beyond their cautious hopes, neutralizing enough of the toxins to give Atlas's powerful body a fighting chance to heal itself. Bobby stood by the window, watching the sunrise while Jessica conferred with Dr. Walsh about the next phase of treatment. Despite the positive turn in Atlas's condition, a heaviness still weighed on him. Blackwood was already maneuvering to distance himself from the environmental disaster at Cooper's Basin. The fight to save Atlas had been won, at least for now, but the larger battle was just beginning. Mike entered the room, his expression telling Bobby that something significant had happened. "Bobby," he said urgently, "you need to see this." He held out his phone, displaying a breaking news story. The headline made Bobby's blood run cold. Millbrook Ranch owner facing charges in connection with environmental disaster. The article beneath claimed that anonymous sources had provided evidence that Bobby Miller had deliberately released toxic substances into Cooper's Basin to frame Blackwood Industries, allegedly due to a personal vendetta over failed business dealings. He's trying to get ahead of the story, Bobby realized, anger burning through his exhaustion. Blackwood's framing me for his own crimes. Mike nodded grimly. Thomas called. Blackwood's lawyers have been working overtime. They're claiming the drainage system was actually on your property line and that you were responsible for the operation. Bobby felt the room seem to tilt around him. After everything, the near loss of Atlas, the discovery of the illegal dumping, the desperate rescue effort, Blackwood was not only evading responsibility, but actively trying to shift blame onto him. "This can't be happening," he muttered, sinking into a chair beside Atlas's treatment platform. The bull, sensing his distress, made a soft sound and tried to move his head toward Bobby. Even now, weakened and recovering from near death, Atlas was trying to offer comfort. Bobby placed his hand on the bull's broad forehead, drawing strength from the connection that had sustained him through so many challenges. "Don't worry, boy," he said quietly. "We're not beaten yet." But as the morning news continued to break, with more outlets picking up the story of Bobby's alleged involvement, the weight of what they were facing became increasingly clear. Blackwood wasn't just fighting to avoid environmental charges, he was launching a calculated campaign to destroy Bobby Miller completely. And if he succeeded, not only would Millbrook Ranch be lost, but Atlas's remarkable fight for survival would have been in vain. Thomas Wilson arrived at the veterinary hospital shortly after noon, his face etched with lines of exhaustion and concern. He found Bobby in Atlas's treatment area, where the bull was showing continued signs of improvement despite the gravity of his condition. The ranger's expression softened slightly at the sight of Atlas raising his head in acknowledgement of Bobby's presence. "He's fighting back," Thomas observed, genuine admiration in his voice. Bobby nodded, the pride in his bull's resilience momentarily overshadowing the dread that had settled in his stomach since seeing the news. "The doctors are calling it remarkable. The enzyme treatment from those leeches is actually working." Thomas glanced around to ensure they had privacy before speaking again, his voice lower. "We need to talk about what's happening with Blackwood. He's moving faster than we anticipated." Bobby's jaw tightened. "He's trying to frame me for his own environmental crimes." "My lawyer called. There's already talk of a grand jury investigation." "That's why I'm here," Thomas replied, pulling up a chair. "Sam and I spent all night documenting everything we found at Cooper's Basin. The EPA has officially taken over the investigation, which means all evidence goes through proper channels. Channels that Blackwood can influence," Bobby interrupted bitterly. "I've seen how this works, Thomas. Men like him don't face consequences. They buy their way out." Thomas leaned forward, his expression intense. "Not this time." Because Blackwood made one critical mistake. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a waterproof evidence bag containing what looked like a small leather-bound book. "While you were focused on Atlas yesterday, Sam made a discovery at the drainage site." Bobby took the bag, examining its contents through the plastic. "What is this?" "A maintenance log," Thomas explained. "Handwritten with dates, times, and chemical quantities. And signed on every page by Victor Blackwood himself." Bobby's eyes widened as he flipped through the protected pages. "He kept records of his illegal dumping?" "Arrogance," Thomas said simply. "Men like Blackwood believe they're untouchable. This log was locked in a waterproof case at the control station. My guess is he wanted documentation to ensure his employees were following exact protocols for the dumping, never imagining it would fall into the hands of authorities." Hope flickered in Bobby's chest for the first time since seeing the news reports. This proves he was directly involved. He can't claim ignorance with his signature on every page. Thomas nodded. The EPA has the original. This is a photocopy I'm not supposed to have, much less show you. But I wanted you to know that despite what's in the news, the real investigation is building a solid case. How long? Bobby asked, the practical rancher in him needing to understand the timeline. How long before this evidence becomes public? Blackwood is destroying my reputation by the hour. Thomas's expression grew more serious. That's the other reason I'm here. The formal investigation could take weeks, even months. Blackwood knows this. He's counting on destroying you in the court of public opinion long before the legal process catches up to him. Bobby's shoulders sagged. Even with evidence of Blackwood's guilt, the damage to Millbrook Ranch's reputation might be irreparable. In the livestock business, reputation was everything. Who would do business with a rancher accused of environmental crimes? We need to fight back on his terms, Jessica said, entering the room with Sam Hayes behind her. If Blackwood is using the media, we need to do the same. Sam nodded in agreement. The science is on our side. The leech population, Atlas's condition, the chemical analysis, it all tells a clear story that contradicts Blackwood's version of events. Thomas looked uncomfortable. As federal employees, Sam and I are limited in what we can say publicly while an investigation is ongoing. But we aren't, Mike pointed out, joining the impromptu strategy session, and neither are the veterinarians treating Atlas. Dr. Walsh, who had been checking Atlas's latest test results, looked up with interest. From a medical perspective, Atlas's case is unprecedented. The symbiotic relationship with the leeches, the successful experimental treatment. It's the kind of case study that medical journals would be very interested in. Jessica's eyes lit up. That's it. Instead of trying to fight Blackwood's accusations directly, we change the conversation entirely. We make this about Atlas and his remarkable story. Bobby looked skeptical. How does a story about my bull counter accusations of environmental crimes? Because Atlas's condition is direct evidence of what really happened, Sam explained, warming to Jessica's idea. The toxins in his system match exactly what was being dumped from Blackwood's pipes. The location where he was found is directly downstream from Blackwood's drainage operation. The timeline of his exposure correlates perfectly with the increased dumping activity after your discovery. Thomas nodded slowly. A medical case study wouldn't violate any restrictions on the ongoing investigation. It would simply present the facts as observed by medical professionals. And I know just the journalist to contact, Jessica added. Emma Richardson, from the Florida Environmental Journal. She's been investigating Blackwood Industries for years, but never had enough evidence for a major story. Bobby looked at Atlas, who was watching the gathering with alert eyes despite his weakened state. The bull had already done so much, saved a calf from rustlers, survived a toxic swamp, led them to discover Blackwood's illegal operation. Now, even in recovery, he might be the key to exposing the truth. Make the call, he decided. Within hours, Emma Richardson arrived at the veterinary hospital, a compact woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and the focused energy of an investigative journalist who recognized a major story. Dr. Walsh gave her a complete tour of Atlas's treatment facility, explaining in detail the extraordinary measures being taken to save the bull's life. So, these enzymes derived from the leeches are actually neutralizing the industrial toxins? Emma clarified, taking rapid notes as Dr. Walsh explained the treatment protocol. Exactly, the veterinarian confirmed. It's a remarkable case of evolutionary adaptation. The leech population in Cooper's Basin appears to have developed specific enzymes to counter the exact chemicals being illegally dumped into their habitat. Sam, careful to speak only about the scientific aspects rather than the ongoing investigation, provided context about the medicinal leeches. This particular subspecies of Hirudo medicinalis was thought to be virtually extinct in the wild. Finding such a robust population in Cooper's Basin is significant from a conservation perspective. And they formed a protective ring around the bull? Emma asked, her skepticism evident. We have photographic evidence, Sam confirmed, showing her the images taken during the rescue. It appears to be a previously undocumented form of symbiotic behavior. The bull's body heat and relative stability in the mud provided the leeches with a refuge from the spreading contamination, while they, in turn, created a partial barrier between him and the most concentrated toxins. Emma turned to Bobby, who had remained relatively quiet during the technical explanations. Mr. Miller, why was Atlas in Cooper's Basin to begin with? Bobby explained the attempted cattle rustling and Atlas's protective response in chasing after the thief who had taken the calf. He was careful to stick to the facts without directly accusing Blackwood of orchestrating the theft, though the implication was clear. Atlas has always been protective of smaller animals, he concluded, but I never imagined his instincts would lead to all this. And what do you say to the allegations that you're responsible for the toxic dumping? Emma asked directly, her journalistic objectivity requiring she address the public accusations. Bobby met her gaze steadily. I say, look at the evidence. Look at Atlas, fighting for his life because he was exposed to chemicals that match exactly what's flowing from that hidden drainage pipe. Ask yourself who benefits from poisoning Cooper's Basin and who loses everything because of it. Emma nodded, seemingly satisfied with his response. I'd like to include Atlas's history in the article, his background, his importance to Millbrook Ranch. Readers connect with animal stories on an emotional level. It provides context that dry environmental reporting often lacks. Atlas isn't just economically valuable, Bobby said, moving to stand beside the bull's treatment platform. He's family. When my wife Linda was dying of cancer, I spent every possible moment at the hospital with her. Atlas would wait by the gate for me to return, no matter what time it was. After she passed, there were days when the only reason I got out of bed was because Atlas needed care. His voice roughened with emotion. He's always been more than livestock. What you're seeing now, this fight to survive, this refusal to give up, that's who he's always been. Emma's professional detachment softened visibly. May I? She asked, gesturing toward Atlas. Bobby nodded, and she approached carefully. Atlas watched her with intelligent curiosity, his massive head rising slightly from the platform. Remarkable, Emma murmured, clearly impressed by the bull's size and presence even in his weakened state. And you said he broke through a reinforced trailer partition to chase after the rustler who took the calf? Snapped the metal pins like they were toothpicks, Mike confirmed. I've worked with bulls all my life, but I've never seen anything like it. Pure protective instinct. As Emma continued gathering information for her story, Sam pulled Bobby aside. There's something else you should know, she said quietly. The university researchers have been analyzing the leech population from Cooper's Basin. They believe these particular leeches might have significant medical applications beyond what we're seeing with Atlas. What kind of applications? Bobby asked. The enzymes they produce show potential for treating certain types of poisoning in humans, possibly even applications for breaking down environmental contaminants in water systems. She hesitated before continuing. If these preliminary findings hold up, these leeches could be incredibly valuable from both a medical and environmental remediation perspective. Bobby's eyes narrowed as understanding dawned. You think that's why Blackwood chose Cooper's Basin for dumping? He knew about the leeches? Sam nodded grimly. We found research equipment at a secondary site near the drainage operation. It appears they were studying the leeches while simultaneously poisoning their habitat. My theory is that Blackwood wanted to harvest the enzymes for pharmaceutical applications while eliminating the natural population, creating a monopoly on the source. That's why he was so interested in my property, Bobby realized. Millbrook shares a watershed with Cooper's Basin. He wasn't just after my land for development. He wanted control of the entire ecosystem. Their conversation was interrupted by a commotion at the hospital entrance. Thomas entered the treatment area, his expression urgent. Blackwood's lawyers just served the hospital with papers demanding Atlas be surrendered to their custody, he announced. They're claiming he's evidence in an environmental crime and needs to be examined by their own experts. Dr. Walsh looked outraged. That's absurd. Moving him in his condition could kill him. They know that, Bobby said quietly, the pieces falling into place. If Atlas dies, the strongest evidence against Blackwood disappears with him. The toxins in his system, the connection to the leeches, all of it. Emma Richardson was already on her phone, her journalist's instincts recognizing another dimension to the story. I'm moving up publication, she told her editor. This needs to go live tonight, not next week. Thomas pulled Bobby and Jessica aside. The hospital can challenge the order, but legally it's complicated. Atlas is livestock, not a person. Property rights become a factor. Jessica's expression hardened with determination. Then we need to change how the law sees him, not as livestock, but as a key witness in an environmental crime. Can we do that? Bobby asked, looking between Thomas and Jessica. Not easily, Thomas admitted, but we might buy time if we can get a temporary protective order based on his medical condition. Dr. Walsh joined them, having overheard. I can certainly provide medical documentation that moving Atlas would constitute a serious risk to his health. That might give us grounds for an emergency injunction. As they discussed legal strategies, Bobby noticed Atlas becoming increasingly agitated. The bull's ears were pricked forward, his nostrils flaring as if he'd caught a concerning scent. Years of working with the animal had taught Bobby to trust Atlas's instincts. Something's wrong, he said, interrupting the conversation. Atlas senses something. Moments later, the treatment room door opened, and Victor Blackwood himself walked in, flanked by two men in expensive suits and a woman who was clearly his personal veterinarian. His silver hair was immaculately styled, his tailored clothing a stark contrast to the practical attire of the hospital staff and rangers. "Mr. Miller," Blackwood greeted him with cold civility. "I've come to inspect the animal at the center of these unfortunate allegations." Bobby stepped protectively closer to Atlas, who was watching Blackwood with unmistakable recognition and what Bobby could only describe as focused hostility. The bull's massive muscles tensed despite his weakened state. "You have no right to be here," Bobby said flatly. "This is a restricted treatment area." Blackwood smiled thinly, holding up a document. "Actually, I have every right. This court order grants my veterinary team access to examine the bull. After all, if you're claiming his condition is the result of my company's activities, we have the right to verify those claims independently." Dr. Walsh stepped forward, professional outrage evident in her stance. "Moving or disturbing this animal in his current condition could reverse the progress we've made in stabilizing him." "We have no intention of moving him yet," Blackwood replied smoothly. "Merely examining him and taking our own samples." The emphasis on "yet" wasn't lost on anyone in the room. Bobby felt a cold certainty that if Blackwood gained access to Atlas, the bull wouldn't survive to testify against him. Thomas moved forward, his ranger uniform lending official weight to his presence. "The animal is part of an ongoing federal investigation. Any interference could constitute obstruction of justice." Blackwood's lawyer immediately countered, "Our court order specifically addresses that concern. We're entitled to our own independent testing to verify the claims being made." As the confrontation escalated, with legal arguments flying back and forth, Bobby noticed Emma Richardson quietly recording everything on her phone. The journalist caught his eye and gave a slight nod. Everything happening was becoming part of the story. Suddenly, Atlas made a decision of his own. With strength that should have been impossible in his condition, the massive bull heaved himself upright on the treatment platform. Standing unsteadily but definitively, he lowered his head toward Blackwood, a low, rumbling sound emanating from his chest. The message was unmistakable, a warning from predator to predator. The room fell silent, everyone staring at the improbable sight of the severely injured bull rising to confront the perceived threat. Even Blackwood took an involuntary step backward, momentary fear flashing across his composed features. Dr. Walsh recovered first, moving quickly to Atlas's side to check his vital signs. This level of exertion could set back his recovery significantly, she said, concern evident in her voice. Everyone who isn't essential medical personnel needs to leave immediately. Blackwood regained his composure, though he maintained his distance from Atlas. My veterinarian stays, he insisted. The court order is quite clear. Before the standoff could escalate further, the hospital director arrived, accompanied by the university's legal counsel. After reviewing the documents and the medical situation, they proposed a compromise. Blackwood's veterinarian could observe Atlas and review his medical records, but no invasive testing would be permitted until his condition stabilized further. This isn't over, Miller, Blackwood said quietly as his team prepared to leave. That bull is the only thing connecting me to Cooper's Basin, and bulls don't live forever. Is that a threat? Bobby asked, equally quiet. Blackwood merely smiled. Just an observation about the natural order of things. Even remarkable specimens reach the end of their usefulness eventually. After Blackwood departed, Bobby helped the medical team settle Atlas back into a resting position. The bull's brief show of strength had cost him, his breathing now more labored as the exertion taxed his recovering systems. Easy, boy, Bobby murmured, stroking the bull's massive neck. You've made your point. Emma approached, putting away her phone. I've never seen anything like that, she said, genuine awe in her voice. It was almost as if he understood exactly who Blackwood was and what was happening. He did, Bobby said simply. Atlas has always been able to read people. He knew Blackwood was a threat. The journalist nodded thoughtfully. I'm filing my story tonight. Atlas's reaction to Blackwood will be in it. Seeing is believing, and what I just witnessed was extraordinary. As Emma left to complete her article, Bobby sat beside Atlas, who had settled but remained alert, his eyes occasionally moving to the door as if expecting Blackwood's return. What Blackwood said is true in one sense, Bobby told Jessica and Thomas quietly. Atlas is the living link between him and the environmental crimes at Cooper's Basin. As long as Blackwood can create doubt about that connection, he has a chance of escaping consequences. Then we need to strengthen that connection with evidence that can't be disputed, Thomas replied. The EPA is analyzing the chemical signatures from Atlas's blood samples and comparing them to the waste in the drainage system. If they match exactly, that's compelling evidence regardless of who owns the land where the pipes were found. Sam, who had been conferring with the university researchers, joined them with news. The enzyme extraction from the leeches is showing promising results in neutralizing similar chemical compounds in laboratory settings. The researchers believe this could lead to a breakthrough in treating certain types of poisoning, making the leeches even more valuable, Jessica noted, and strengthening the motive for Blackwood to eliminate the natural population while harvesting their unique properties for profit. Bobby looked at Atlas, who had finally begun to relax, his massive sides rising and falling in a more regular rhythm. So much depends on him now, he said softly. Not just the ranch, but justice for what's happening to Cooper's Basin. As night fell, Bobby refused to leave Atlas's side, convinced that Blackwood would attempt another move to gain control of the bull. Jessica eventually persuaded him to use a cot the hospital staff had set up beside Atlas's treatment platform, allowing him to rest while remaining close. In the darkened treatment room, with only the soft beeping of monitoring equipment and Atlas's steady breathing breaking the silence, Bobby finally allowed himself to confront the magnitude of what they were facing. Blackwood's resources seemed limitless. Legal teams, political connections, media influence. Against such power, what chance did a struggling rancher and his injured bull really have? Yet as he watched Atlas sleeping, occasionally twitching as he dreamed, Bobby felt a resolve hardening within him. The bull had never given up, not when abandoned as a sickly calf, not when trapped in toxic mud, not when his body was shutting down from poison. That same stubborn will to survive, to protect what mattered, now burned in Bobby's chest. "We're not beaten yet," he whispered to the sleeping bull. "Not by a long shot." What Bobby couldn't know as he finally drifted to sleep was that Emma Richardson's article was already sending shock waves through media circles, with its compelling narrative of a heroic bull, mysterious medicinal leeches, and a wealthy businessman's apparent attempt to monopolize a potentially revolutionary medical treatment, all while poisoning a protected ecosystem in the process. By morning, Atlas's story would be trending nationwide, and the carefully constructed narrative Blackwood had been building would face its first serious challenge. Bobby woke to the gentle touch of Jessica's hand on his shoulder. He blinked, momentarily disoriented before his eyes found Atlas. The bull was awake, his massive head raised slightly from the treatment platform, alert eyes fixed on Bobby. "Morning, boy," Bobby said, his voice rough with sleep as he moved to Atlas's side. "How's he doing?" he asked Jessica. "Better than anyone expected," she replied, genuine amazement in her voice. "His latest blood work shows significant improvement. The enzyme treatment is working. The toxin levels are dropping steadily." Dr. Walsh entered, tablet in hand, reviewing Atlas's overnight monitoring data. "His vital signs stabilized completely around 3 a.m., she reported. "Kidney function is returning to normal parameters, and his respiratory distress has decreased by nearly 40%. I've been practicing veterinary medicine for 25 years, and I've never seen recovery like this in an animal his size after such severe toxic exposure." Hope bloomed in Bobby's chest as he ran a hand along Atlas's powerful neck. The bull responded with a familiar rumble, the sound he'd always made when greeting Bobby in the pasture at Millbrook. "That's my boy," Bobby murmured. "I knew you wouldn't give up." Mike burst into the treatment room, excitement visible in his usually stoic expression. "You need to see this," he said, holding up his phone. "Emma's story went live at midnight. It's everywhere." Bobby took the phone, scanning the headline. "Miracle Bull Survives Toxic Swamp, Exposes Potential Environmental Crime." Below was a powerful image of Atlas during his rescue, surrounded by the protective ring of medicinal leeches, his massive form half submerged in contaminated mud, but his head still proudly raised. The article detailed everything. Atlas's protective charge after the calf, his struggle for survival in Cooper's Basin, the bizarre symbiotic relationship with the endangered medicinal leeches, and the groundbreaking treatment derived from their enzymes. Emma had carefully presented the facts regarding the illegal drainage system while avoiding direct accusations that couldn't yet be proven, but the implications were unmistakable. Most damaging to Blackwood was the section describing his attempt to gain custody of Atlas and the bull's dramatic reaction to his presence, complete with video that had already gone viral across social media platforms. "The comments are overwhelmingly supportive," Jessica noted, reading over her father's shoulder. "People are outraged about the environmental damage and touched by Atlas's story. #SaveAtlas is trending nationwide." Thomas arrived shortly after, bringing more news. "Blackwood's in full damage control mode." He's called a press conference for noon, and his legal team is trying to get an emergency injunction against Emma's article, claiming it prejudices potential jurors. Too late for that, Mike commented. The story's everywhere now. News vans have been arriving at the hospital since dawn. Dr. Walsh looked concerned. We can't have media disrupting Atlas's treatment. He's improving, but he's still in critical condition. We won't, Bobby assured her. But we can use this attention to protect him. The more eyes on Atlas's story, the harder it becomes for Blackwood to make him disappear. Sam entered, bringing updates from the EPA investigation. The chemical analysis results are conclusive, she reported. The toxins in Atlas's bloodstream exactly match the signature of the waste being dumped through Blackwood's drainage system. It's like a fingerprint, unique and irrefutable. Is it enough for criminal charges? Bobby asked. Thomas's expression remained cautious. The evidence is building, but environmental cases move slowly through the legal system. Blackwood has an army of lawyers who will challenge every piece of evidence, every testing protocol, every chain of custody. But public opinion moves faster, Jessica pointed out. And right now, the court of public opinion is solidly behind Atlas. As if to prove her point, Bobby's phone rang. It was the local news station requesting an interview. Before he could respond, it rang again, another reporter. Within minutes, calls were coming in from national networks, wildlife organizations, and even international media outlets. This is bigger than we anticipated, Thomas observed, watching Bobby's phone light up with notifications. Atlas's story resonates with people, Sam said. The loyal bull, the mysterious leeches, the threatened ecosystem, it has all the elements of a compelling narrative that makes people care about environmental issues that might otherwise seem abstract. Bobby felt torn between leveraging this sudden attention and focusing on Atlas's recovery. "What's our priority here?" he asked the group gathered around the bull's treatment platform. "Keeping Atlas safe and continuing his treatment," Dr. Walsh said firmly. "Everything else is secondary from a medical perspective." "But the public attention is his best protection right now," Thomas countered. "The more people following his story, the harder it becomes for Blackwood to interfere." Bobby nodded, making his decision. "We do both. Dr. Walsh maintains complete control over Atlas's medical care and access to him. The rest of us manage the public narrative to ensure Blackwood can't bury what happened at Cooper's Basin." With that plan in place, they organized a brief press conference outside the veterinary hospital. Bobby, flanked by Thomas and Sam, addressed the gathered reporters. He kept his statement focused on Atlas's condition and the remarkable treatment developed from the medicinal leeches, allowing Thomas and Sam to address the environmental aspects within the constraints of the ongoing investigation. "Atlas is a fighter," Bobby told the cameras, his weathered face showing the emotional toll of the past days. "All he did was try to protect a vulnerable calf, and it nearly cost him his life. But in doing so, he exposed something much bigger than any of us initially realized." Questions flew from the assembled journalists. "Mr. Miller, do you believe Victor Blackwood targeted your ranch specifically?" "Ranger Wilson, will criminal charges be filed for the environmental damage?" "Dr. Hayes, what's the significance of the medicinal leech population in Cooper's Basin?" They answered carefully, mindful of the ongoing investigation and potential legal ramifications. Bobby emphasized Atlas's improving condition and the groundbreaking nature of his treatment, while Sam explained the scientific importance of the previously undocumented leech population and their unique enzymes. As they concluded the press conference, a reporter called out one final question. "Mr. Miller, is it true that Blackwood Industries has offered to purchase Millbrook Ranch for 3 times its market value since this incident began?" Bobby paused, surprised by the question and uncertain how the reporter had learned of the offer that had arrived by courier that morning, a final attempt by Blackwood to resolve the situation by simply buying out his opponent. Yes, that's true, he acknowledged, seeing no benefit in denial. And my answer remains the same as it's been for the past 2 years. Millbrook Ranch isn't for sale, not at any price. Back inside the hospital, they found Emma Richardson in Atlas's treatment room, speaking quietly with Dr. Walsh as she gathered information for a follow-up article. The bull seemed remarkably at ease with the journalist's presence, watching her with the same intelligent curiosity he showed toward people he'd accepted. "Your press conference is already making waves," Emma told them, showing her tablet where news alerts about Atlas's story continued to multiply. "Blackwood's moved his own press conference up to compete with yours. He's speaking in 15 minutes. They gathered around a small television in the hospital break room to watch Blackwood's response. The businessman appeared perfectly composed behind a podium emblazoned with his company logo, his expression one of concerned benevolence. "First, let me say how pleased I am to hear that Mr. Miller's bull is recovering," he began, his voice carrying just the right note of sincerity. "Blackwood Industries has always maintained the highest standards of environmental stewardship, which is why these unfounded allegations are so troubling." He went on to present an alternative narrative. The drainage system had been installed by a subcontractor without proper authorization, operating entirely without his knowledge. Upon learning of the situation, he had immediately contacted environmental authorities and committed substantial resources to the cleanup effort. As for the unfortunate timing of the cattle-rustling attempt that led Mr. Miller's bull into Cooper's Basin, I categorically deny any involvement," Blackwood continued smoothly. "These accusations appear to stem from a long-standing boundary dispute between Blackwood Industries and Millbrook Ranch, a dispute I've repeatedly attempted to resolve amicably through generous purchase offers." "He's good," Thomas said grudgingly as they watched, "presenting himself as the responsible corporate citizen while painting you as a bitter holdout with a personal vendetta." Bobby nodded grimly. "And people will believe him because he's Victor Blackwood, philanthropist, job creator, pillar of the community." But as Blackwood opened the floor to questions, it became clear that the narrative wasn't proceeding as smoothly as he'd hoped. The reporters pressed him on specific details. "Mr. Blackwood, can you explain why maintenance logs with your signature were found at the drainage site? Is it true that your company has been researching the medicinal leeches in Cooper's Basin while simultaneously poisoning their habitat? Why did you personally attempt to gain custody of the bull if, as you claim, there's no connection between your operations and his condition?" Blackwood's composure slipped momentarily before he regained control, deflecting the most damaging questions to his legal team. But the damage was done. The confident narrative he'd tried to establish was crumbling under the weight of specific, factual questions he couldn't easily dismiss. "They've done their homework," Jessica observed. "Emma's article gave them a roadmap to follow." When a reporter asked about the viral video showing Atlas's reaction to Blackwood's presence in the treatment room, the businessman's mask of benevolence finally cracked. "I find it absurd that we're discussing a bull's supposed personal animosity toward me as if it were evidence of anything," he snapped. "This anthropomorphizing of livestock may make for compelling social media content, but it has no place in serious discussions of environmental policy or legal liability." Mike chuckled darkly. "He just insulted everyone who's been touched by Atlas's story. Bad move." As Blackwood abruptly concluded the press conference, it was clear his carefully constructed narrative had failed to achieve its intended effect. Rather than quelling the controversy, he had inadvertently fanned the flames. "He's used to controlling the story," Bobby said, turning away from the television, "but this time the story's bigger than him." They returned to Atlas's treatment room, where Dr. Walsh was overseeing a team preparing the bull for his first attempt at standing unassisted since the rescue. The monitoring equipment had been adjusted to allow him greater freedom of movement while still tracking his vital signs. "His strength is returning remarkably quickly," Dr. Walsh explained. Controlled movement will actually help his recovery at this stage, as long as we don't overdo it. Bobby moved to Atlas's head, speaking softly to the bull as the medical team removed the last restraints. "Ready to try standing, boy? Nice and easy now." Atlas seemed to understand perfectly. With deliberate care, the massive bull gathered his legs beneath him and rose to a standing position. He swayed slightly before finding his balance, his head raised with a dignity that belied his recent brush with death. A spontaneous round of applause broke out among the medical staff, witnessing this milestone in his recovery. Atlas turned his head, seeming almost embarrassed by the attention, before focusing again on Bobby. "That's it," Bobby encouraged, moving slowly around the platform to check Atlas's stance from all angles. "Looking strong already." Dr. Walsh monitored the readings carefully. Heart rate elevated, but within acceptable parameters. Respiration good. This is remarkable progress for an animal that was near death just days ago. As Atlas continued to stand, growing more confident with each passing minute, the treatment room door opened. A distinguished older man in a business suit entered, accompanied by the hospital's director. "Mr. Miller, I'm James Harrington from the Governor's Office of Environmental Protection." The man introduced himself. "I'd like to speak with you about Cooper's Basin and the events of the past few days." Bobby tensed, uncertain whether this represented help or a new complication. Thomas stepped forward, his official capacity as a ranger giving him standing in environmental matters. "The EPA has primary jurisdiction over the investigation," he pointed out. Harrington nodded. "Yes, and they'll continue to lead the criminal investigation. My office is more concerned with the immediate remediation efforts and the protection of the medicinal leech population. Based on the preliminary findings, the governor has declared Cooper's Basin an emergency ecological preservation zone." The significance of this announcement wasn't lost on anyone present. An emergency preservation declaration would immediately halt any activity in the basin, including Blackwood's operations on adjacent land. "That's unexpected," Bobby said cautiously. "Blackwood has considerable political influence in this state." Harrington's expression remained professionally neutral, but a hint of satisfaction showed in his eyes. "Even political influence has its limits when public attention becomes sufficiently focused. The governor is particularly concerned about the medicinal leeches and their potential healthcare applications." As they discussed the implications of the emergency declaration, Atlas suddenly tensed, his head turning toward the door seconds before it opened again. This time, it was Emma Richardson, her expression urgent. "You need to see this," she said, holding up her tablet. On the screen was a breaking news alert. Blackwood Industries insider comes forward with evidence of systematic environmental violations. The story detailed how a senior executive from Blackwood's company had approached federal authorities with documentation of a deliberate strategy to dump chemical waste in ecologically sensitive areas while simultaneously researching valuable natural resources that could be harvested before the environments were destroyed. Cooper's Basin was just one of several sites, Emma explained. According to this whistleblower, Blackwood has been running the same operation across 3 states, targeting areas with unique biological resources that could be monetized. The room fell silent as they absorbed this development. For Bobby, it represented vindication, proof that his suspicions about Blackwood's true motives had been correct all along. For Thomas and Sam, it meant the environmental case had suddenly expanded far beyond Cooper's Basin. "This changes everything," Thomas said finally. "With a cooperating insider, the federal case becomes much stronger. And harder for Blackwood to dismiss as a personal vendetta against him," Jessica added. Bobby moved back to Atlas's side, the bull having remained standing throughout these revelations. "Hear that, boy? Looks like you started something bigger than any of us realized." Atlas lowered his massive head to gently butt against Bobby's chest, a gesture of affection he'd performed since he was a calf. Despite his weakened state, there was strength in the movement, and something that Bobby could only interpret as satisfaction. Over the next several days, Atlas's recovery continued to defy medical expectations. His blood work improved steadily, his strength returned, and his distinctive personality re-emerged fully. The enzyme treatment derived from the medicinal leeches proved remarkably effective at neutralizing the specific toxins in his system, leading Dr. Walsh to document the case for veterinary journals. Meanwhile, the legal and public relations battle with Blackwood Industries escalated. The whistleblower's revelations had triggered investigations in multiple states, with environmental agencies coordinating to build a comprehensive case against the company. Blackwood himself had gone uncharacteristically quiet, his public appearances canceled as he presumably focused on his legal defense. Bobby divided his time between the hospital, where Atlas continued his recovery, and Millbrook Ranch, which had suddenly found itself at the center of unexpected attention. Environmental groups, medical researchers, and even pharmaceutical companies expressed interest in the unique ecosystem where Atlas and the medicinal leeches had formed their unlikely alliance. 1 week after the rescue, Dr. Walsh finally delivered the news Bobby had been waiting for. "Atlas is stable enough for transport," she announced after reviewing his latest tests. "With proper precautions, he can return to Millbrook." The journey home was carefully planned, with a specialized transport vehicle equipped with monitoring equipment and veterinary support. As they prepared Atlas for the trip, Bobby found himself reflecting on the extraordinary chain of events that a simple act of bovine courage had set in motion. "Ready to go home, boy?" he asked softly as the loading ramp was positioned. Atlas's response was unmistakable. The massive bull moved forward with purpose, his stride strong and determined as he walked up the ramp into the transport vehicle under his own power. Behind them, the veterinary team applauded spontaneously, many with tears in their eyes at witnessing the completion of this remarkable recovery. The drive to Millbrook took just over an hour, with Jessica monitoring Atlas continuously. As they turned onto the long driveway leading to the ranch, Bobby was stunned to see dozens of vehicles parked along the road and a crowd gathered near the main pasture. "What's all this?" he asked, confused and slightly alarmed. Mike, who had driven ahead to prepare for Atlas's arrival, approached the transport vehicle as it stopped. "Word got out that Atlas was coming home today," he explained. "These people wanted to welcome him back. Local families, environmental activists, reporters, even some of the researchers from the university." Bobby was momentarily speechless. The idea that so many strangers would gather to celebrate the return of a bull, even one as exceptional as Atlas, had never occurred to him. With careful coordination, they unloaded Atlas from the transport vehicle. The bull paused at the top of the ramp, surveying the gathered crowd with what Bobby could only describe as dignified curiosity. Then, with deliberate steps, Atlas descended to the ground of Millbrook Ranch for the first time since his ordeal began. A cheer went up from the assembled people, banners visible among the crowd. "Welcome home, Atlas, and Hero Bull saves the swamp, and Millbrook strong." Atlas took it all in stride, his attention quickly shifting to the familiar pastures beyond the crowd. Bobby walked beside him, no halter or lead rope needed as they made their way toward the special recovery area they'd prepared, a comfortable enclosure with fresh bedding and high-quality feed where Atlas could continue his recuperation in familiar surroundings. As they passed the main cattle pen, a small commotion broke out. The calf that Atlas had risked everything to protect, now recovered from its own ordeal, pressed against the fence, making distressed sounds as it recognized Atlas. Without hesitation, Bobby opened the gate. The calf bolted through, running directly to Atlas and pressing against the massive bull's side. Atlas lowered his head, gently nudging the calf in what could only be described as recognition and reassurance. The crowd fell silent, witnessing this reunion between rescuer and rescued. Emma Richardson, who had arrived to document Atlas's homecoming, captured the moment on camera, a powerful image that would soon circle the globe, further cementing Atlas's status as a symbol of courage and protection. That evening, as the visitors departed and quiet returned to Millbrook, Bobby sat on the fence of Atlas's recovery enclosure, watching the bull resting comfortably with the calf curled up beside him. Jessica joined him, passing him a cup of coffee. "Quite a day," she observed, leaning against the fence. Bobby nodded, sipping the hot drink gratefully. "Never imagined anything like this. A bull becoming a national celebrity." "Not just any bull," Jessica corrected him. "Atlas is special. People recognize that." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching Atlas occasionally raise his head to check his surroundings before settling back to rest. The worst was behind him now, his recovery proceeding better than anyone had dared hope. "The governor's office called while you were settling Atlas," Jessica finally said. "They want to designate Cooper's Basin as a permanent ecological research preserve, with special protection for the medicinal leech population. They're asking if Millbrook would consider serving as a partner in the conservation effort, since our land shares the watershed." Bobby considered this, looking out over the ranch that had been his family's for generations. "What would that mean for us practically?" "Funding, for one thing," Jessica replied. "Grants for sustainable ranching practices, water quality monitoring. We'd maintain full ownership and operational control, but we'd commit to certain conservation standards." The idea had merit. Millbrook had always operated with respect for the land, but formal recognition and financial support would make it easier to maintain those standards while staying economically viable. "And Blackwood?" Bobby asked. "What's happening with him?" Jessica's expression hardened slightly. "Thomas called earlier. The federal grand jury has been convened. With the whistleblower's testimony and the physical evidence from Cooper's Basin, indictments are expected within weeks. Blackwood Industries stock is in freefall." Bobby nodded, satisfaction mingling with a deeper sense of justice served. Not for himself or even for Millbrook, but for Cooper's Basin and all the other ecosystems Blackwood had targeted for exploitation and destruction. As darkness settled over the ranch, Bobby made one final check on Atlas before heading to the house. The bull was sleeping peacefully, his massive sides rising and falling in the steady rhythm of healing rest. The calf remained curled beside him, secure in the protection of its unlikely guardian. "Good night, old friend," Bobby said softly. "Welcome home." Atlas opened one eye briefly, acknowledging Bobby's presence before drifting back to sleep. In that moment of connection, Bobby felt a profound gratitude for this remarkable animal whose courage and will to survive had changed everything. What had begun as a desperate race to save a trapped bull had transformed into something far greater: the protection of a unique ecosystem, the exposure of corporate environmental crimes, and the discovery of medical resources that might benefit countless lives, all because one bull had refused to abandon a vulnerable calf, even at the risk of his own life. As Bobby walked back to the farmhouse under a sky brilliant with stars, he reflected that some heroes came in unexpected forms, and sometimes the most powerful acts of courage were also the simplest, the instinctive choice to protect those who couldn't protect themselves. In that, perhaps, lay a lesson for us all. Ladies and gentlemen, Atlas's journey reminds us that even in our golden years, the courage to stand against seemingly insurmountable odds can lead to unexpected victories. And like Bobby Miller, many of us have faced challenges that threatened everything we've built: health crises, financial struggles, or watching our communities change beyond recognition. Yet Atlas shows us that with unwavering determination and the support of those who believe in us, we can not only survive but triumph in ways we never imagined. The bond between Bobby and Atlas mirrors the deep connections we've formed throughout our lives, with family, friends, and even the special animals who've shared our journey. When Atlas returned home to find a community rallying behind him, it reminds us that our stories matter, our stands against injustice matter, and we're never too old to make a difference that ripples far beyond our own lives. Have you ever taken a stand to protect something you loved when everyone said it was hopeless? Or has an animal in your life shown extraordinary loyalty or intelligence that others wouldn't believe? Share your stories of unexpected courage in the comments below. Your experience might be exactly what someone else needs to hear today.